For part two, we're going to improve on the previous design that we had. So just as a reminder, the previous design we had the entity client, and we had product. And they were interrelated to each other through an event called transaction. And what had happened is we've established a relationship of one-to-many between client and transactions, and the same thing for products as a one-to-many. Okay. Now, from a model point of view, this looks good in terms of explaining what a many-to-many relationship is, logically speaking, in this manner. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is improve on this design. And again, using a classical design that's already out there in terms of transactions that might have multiple orders in them, for example, that would be a much better model for this to improve. So what would this look like? So we would still have client. Okay. And we would still have transactions. But a transaction could have many line items. Okay? And then your product would come into play in this manner as a one-to-many. So we still have a one-to-many relationship between client and transaction, but a transaction may have many line items. An example of that will be a purchase order, for example. So let's look at it visually, what a purchase order might look like. So you'd have a client name, order name, or order date, for example, when you order, or the transaction date. And then from under it, you might, right here as part of it, you might have lines of products that you purchased. P1, quantity, so this will be a description. Quantity and price here, for example. And then P2, and let's see, about 11 of these, 2 of these, whatever the price is, etc. And then you would have a total here that adds all this up. Okay, so now what you have here are line items. So what this allows us to do now, for one transaction, which is based on that order date, we could have many line items there. And each one of these line items is tied to a product. So each one of them is tied up to a product right here. Okay, so this would be the idea here of improving this design into this. Okay, so now let's formalize this design in a much better ERD. So let me just go ahead and redraw. Now that we have the general idea. Okay, so let me just go ahead and do File, New. Okay, and this time we're going to go ahead and put all the attributes we're going to need for client. We would have client ID. We would have first name, last name. Next will be the transaction, or you could call it the order if you want. We could have an order ID for this transaction. A particular order will have many line items, for example. Again, for the client ID, this will be your primary key. For the order ID, this would be also your primary key. After that, we would have the client ID as a foreign key. And this would be the order date. Okay. And what we would have after that is, let's say, we would have a line item Okay, so this would have a line item ID, for example. And this would be its own primary key, unique key. And then it will have the order ID as a foreign key. Okay, and under that it will be quantity. For example, how much of that product did you purchase? Okay, well, obviously, so we need a product. So we need a product ID as a foreign key as well. So yes, you can have multiple foreign keys in an entity, or what we call a table. So here's your product. It would have a product ID as a primary key here. This would be a primary key. Okay, this would be a description. Maybe unit price here. Okay, so anything that describes the product might be in here. Okay, so now the relationships. So we're going to take this client ID, connect it to this client ID, and make this a one-to-many. We're going to be doing the same thing. You're going to take this order ID and connect it to this order ID and make this a one-to-many. You're going to do the same thing here. You're going to take your primary key here and line it up with your foreign key here, and this will be a one-to-many. Hence, you have a simple ERD for a transactional database system, okay, that would track any purchases done within a certain date, and all of these purchases will be under that order for various product for a particular client. And that is what we will model in the next part,